We're down to the final 4 teams in the NBA playoffs, and with a berth to the NBA Finals on the line, the stakes now are higher than ever. And with the top guys on each team being 26 years old or younger, we will see a rising star win their first NBA title and potentially start a new era. So today, we're going to predict which 2 teams will make it to the NBA Finals by analyzing the matchups in the Eastern and Western Conference Finals. But before we get started, go ahead and leave a like and subscribe to the channel, as we are on the road to 500 subscribers. It'd be greatly appreciated, and I hope to recommend these type of videos to NBA fans like you. So remember to leave a like and subscribe to the channel, and let's get into it by talking about my conference finals predictions out east. So the Eastern Conference Finals are going to be between the 1st-seeded Boston Celtics and the 6th-seeded Indiana Pacers. And if you just looked at the seeds, if you looked at the regular season, and if you looked at these teams' performances in the playoffs, I'd think it'd be pretty obvious to take the Celtics in 4 or 5. I'd say that's a general consensus, and that's probably where I'm leaning towards too. However, I think the Pacers could really maybe cause some trouble for the Celtics, maybe extend the series longer than what Boston would like. Because even though Indiana played 2 injured teams in the first 2 rounds, in Milwaukee and New York, I thought they played fairly well, and sure, give or take a couple bad games from the Pacers, like Game 5 versus the Knicks, I thought they did a good job closing out that series, and I think they did a good job against teams that have veteran players, that have playoff experienced coaches. I mean, this is a young team for the Pacers. This is a team that isn't used to the bright lights, and for their first time making a real playoff run, I thought they did a pretty okay job getting through the first 2 rounds of the playoffs. And then you look on the other side of the court, and there sit the Boston Celtics, a team that was expected to be here. A team that won 60 games and whose advanced metrics compared to the greatest teams ever, like the 96 Bulls and the 17 Warriors. And I think the stat is that they've made the Eastern Conference Finals 6 times out of the last 8 years, and if anything, they've only gotten better since their last Eastern Conference Finals appearance, so obviously this run was definitely expected. However, throughout the playoffs, a lot of people have thought that the Celtics have underperformed. But let me say that if you can get through your series in 5 games, I don't think that's underperforming. I think if you can beat any team 4 out of 5 times, that's a pretty great accomplishment. So I think the Celtics have been fine, but the one thing that I'm very concerned about for them is the injury of Kristaps Porzingis. Porzingis has been out since Game 4 of the Miami Heat series with a calf injury, and those are not something to play around with, obviously. And since then, Al Horford has taken his spot in the lineup, and other than his great Game 5 against the Cavaliers, he's really been struggling from the field. He shot 47% from the field and 32% from 3 for the entirety of the playoffs. And once we reach those higher rounds like the Eastern Conference Finals and the NBA Finals, they're obviously going to need a much greater performance from Horford going forward. Now, the key for the Celtics to win this series is going to be containing the Pacers' transition game. Now, the Celtics didn't really have to worry much about the transition game in their first series, as the Heat and the Cavaliers are 2 fairly slow-paced teams. However, out of all the teams who made it out of the first round, the Pacers lead the playoffs in transition frequency and transition points per game. And while the Celtics didn't have to deal with the transition much, when they did, they allowed 1.20 transition points per possession, and that's the 4th worst mark out of all the teams in the playoffs. There's definitely a world where the Pacers can run the Celtics out the gym and maybe win 1 or both of the games in Boston before heading back to Indiana. But if the Celtics can limit those transition opportunities, and if they can focus their defense on the half-court offense, then I really think Boston should breeze by through this series. But if Indiana does take some games early, what I'm really worried about is that Kristaps Porzingis injury, and maybe the Celtics rushing him back too early just to maybe get a difference maker in this series. Because Boston obviously doesn't want to lose in the Eastern Conference Finals to a team that they are much more talented than. And if they do rush back Porzingis, and if he does re-aggravate that injury, things are definitely going to be rough in Boston if they make it past the Pacers and have to go against the Timberwolves or the Mavericks in the NBA Finals. But I truly don't think it's going to come to that scenario, and if it ever did, I don't think Boston rushes back Kristaps. Because despite Al Horford not playing the best in these playoffs so far, he's serviceable and he should get the job done against a team like the Pacers. Like I said earlier, I think Boston gets this series done in 5 games. Again, I could see the Pacers pushing this a little bit farther, but Boston is a complete team. They have a lot of great depth, they have a lot of great shooting, they have a lot of great defense, and I think this team could really blow Indiana out of the water in Game 1, demoralize their confidence, and ultimately just cruise through this series and have a little bit of rest while Minnesota and Dallas battles it out. But quickly before I move on to the Western Conference Finals, I'd like to say that another key to this series is going to be Tyrese Haliburton, because this could really be a make or break series for him. And while I did say the Celtics should cruise by this and win in 5, if he performs the way he did in some of those last games against the Knicks, I really think the Pacers have a very, very small chance of taking down the Celtics and maybe even making a run at the NBA title. But again, I said really, really small chance. It's probably not happening. It could, but it's probably not. Let's shift our focus now to the Western Conference, where the 3rd-seeded Minnesota Timberwolves will be taking on the 5th-seeded Dallas Mavericks in the conference finals. I think this is a really interesting matchup, because normally when you see matchups between offense and defense, normally it's a team offense versus the team defense, and while the Timberwolves obviously have a team defense with great perimeter defenders and post defenders, the Mavericks' offense is really centered around 2 guys in Kyrie Irving and Luka Doncic, and honestly, I think those 2 guys' performances will be the key to this series. I don't think it's groundbreaking analysis to say that Luka and Kyrie are the keys to success for Dallas, but I think this is going to be a really interesting series for them, because the Timberwolves have 3 guys who they could throw at them in Jaden McDaniels, Anthony Edwards, and Nickeil Alexander-Walker, and honestly, they could really be a pest to how the Mavericks run their offense. I'm not too worried about Luka, because I think no matter who they put on him, I think he's either going to be physical enough or he'll be quick enough to get by them. I'm really worried about Kyrie Irving here, because I think what Chris Finch is going to do, I think he's going to put Jaden McDaniels on him. And I think the obvious answer would be to put McDaniels on Luka because of the length, but I think the length could be even more of a factor on Irving, and I think McDaniels has more of the lateral quickness that you'd want against Irving. However, I mean, it's Kyrie Irving. Kyrie Irving is great. We've seen him dominate great defenses before. But Jaden McDaniels, man, he really did great in that Nuggets series, and I'm really looking forward to that matchup if it does happen. And then you look at the other side of things at the Dallas Mavericks defense, and honestly, I was pretty concerned about the Mavericks defense going into the playoffs, but against the Clippers and the Thunder, I thought they played really well, Those 2 teams have really great perimeter options, but the Mavericks, they look like a pretty good defensive unit as a whole, and that's really going to be a big factor in this series, because Anthony Edwards has been out of his mind this playoff run. He's been incredible on the offensive end and on the defensive end too. And then you look at the talent surrounding him. Mike Conley is a veteran point guard. Jaden McDaniels is a guy who was incredible offensively in Game 6 and Game 7. Karl Anthony Towns is a great 3-point shooter and someone who can attack you from all 3 levels. But there's one weakness on that starting lineup, and I'm not going to be one of those guys that craps on Rudy Gobert completely. I think he's pretty good. His defensive impact is probably unmatched in the NBA, and I know it's the popular thing to say, "Oh, Rudy Gobert, not that good," but I like him. I think he's good, especially on defense. But I mean, even if you're a Rudy Gobert fan, you can admit with me that he has his limitations offensively. And while he did make some pretty incredible plays in that Game 7, specifically talking about that turnaround jumper that he made, that's probably not happening again. Let's be honest with ourselves. That's not happening again. And I like Gobert, and I think he's going to be very valuable in this series on the defensive end as kind of the free safety position if Luka or Kyrie can get past their perimeter defender. But on offense, he's got his problems. And if he's matched up against Lively and Gafford, and if the Mavericks perimeter defenders can force them to feed the ball to Gobert in the paint and make him make a play, I think that could really be a game-changing play right there. That could really swing a couple things. If they can force some pressure on Gobert, make him make a quick decision, and potentially force some turnovers. Overall for this series, I really don't know who I'm going to pick. If I have to pick, and I have to because this is a video about conference finals predictions, if I have to pick, I'm going to take the Timberwolves in 6 games, I think, but I really think this series could go either way, honestly. I mean, like I said before, I think the defense is really going to be the factor for both of these teams. We really know the defense for the Timberwolves to be great, but if Luka can somehow maybe craft some open shots for some of the guys, they're obviously going to need guys like, Derek Jones, Derek Lively, Daniel Gafford, PJ Washington, of course, who had some really good games in that Thunder series. They're going to really need those guys to step up and perform offensively. But if they don't, Luka really needs to step it up, and that's a lot, considering that they have so many great perimeter defenders on the Timberwolves. And then you look on the other side of things, and this is something that we've kind of forgot about as an NBA community as a whole, but the Timberwolves' offense in the regular season really was not that great. And I know this is a different team, it's a different Anthony Edwards, but I mean, it's still concerning, and it's not something to just completely look past. I mean, their offense in the postseason has been great, but I mean, they can revert back to old habits very quickly, especially if they play a team like the Mavericks, who has been really great defensively so far, and they'll probably be the best defense they've played so far. So it's going to be interesting how both of these teams match up. Ultimately, I'm going to go with the Timberwolves in 6 games, but if you say the Mavericks are going to win, I'm not going to argue against you. I think there's a great possibility the Mavericks can make the finals. If you enjoyed the video, make sure to hit that subscribe button, as we are on the road to 500 subscribers. Again, it'd be greatly appreciated, and it would help let me know that you like this type of NBA content. And yeah, that about does it for me. I'm Julian with Talkback Sports, and I'll see you next time.